Ulysses arrived at Snowman's location, but he failed to hit anything. It slid past, leaving behind a deep chasm. Behind it, fireballs exploded afterward, producing bursts one after another. Klein's somewhat stiff figure flashed about thanks to the fire. The King of the North didn't manage to open up a gap from him as the 5 meters was maintained. By the time Ulysses came to a stop, Klein, who was still invisible, suddenly sensed something amiss. A corresponding scene appeared in his mind. He lunged forward as he clung close to the ground and appeared underneath the frost dragon. Meanwhile, Ulysses' thick and powerful tail had swung over, lashing it towards the nearby Cyathus and Mob. Whoosh! With a loud crack, Mob was sent flying as he dodged the frost dragon's tail. As for Cyathus, she failed to keep up. Although she had the aid of the gales to retreat and reduce the force, she had been struck in the side. The strike shattered the thick illusory scales that surfaced over her body while her ribs fractured. She was also thrown out, but thanks to the wind, she didn't fall too hard onto the snow. If it were Mob or Anderson, this strike would have instantly killed them. Thankfully, the storm pathway had the corresponding illusory scales to protect her. Furthermore, every sequence advancement brought about corresponding improvements. Cyathus was only heavily injured, but she didn't lose consciousness. She didn't even completely lose her mobility. At that moment, Ulysses' neck moved as it widened its mouth, spewing out a light blue beam of light. The beam of light swept past Snowman, freezing him into an ice sculpture. Edwina, Franzia, and Anderson were blocked by the huge dragon's body. They couldn't help him in time with the use of their other beyonder powers because of the distance. Bang! The frost dragon leaped up a little and turned around. When it hit the ground again, it left a slight tremor. At that moment in time, it was clearly in a terrible state. The crack on its right shoulder was abnormally nasty. Although the frozen light blue liquid barely stopped the wound from worsening, its corresponding claw was nearly maimed and could hardly be used. Many of the illusory scales on its body had shattered and abnormally dimmed. It was as though they had lost large amounts of vitality. Regardless, it had severely injured and restrained 3 of its opponents. The situation was much better than before, especially with Gracel being seriously injured. It was no longer caught up in battle and could now attack as it wished. Upon seeing this scene, Edwina's light blue eyes turned black again. Sticky vile thoughts slowly flowed. She suddenly clenched her right palm, causing Ulysses to raise its head in a roar. It was in excruciating pain as light blue liquid flowed from the corner of its eyes and mouth. At that moment, the only thought on the frost dragon's mind was to purge the emotional disturbance from its spirit body. Taking the opportunity, Edwina's eyes lit up and turned extremely pure. The light of dawn around her had quickly materialized into a sword. She wanted to play the role of a guardian to fend off the King of the North. She believed that Gemin Sparrow definitely had his reasons for staying by Ulysses' side while being invisible. All he needed was time. At that moment, a figure enveloped in the original light of dawn had charged at the frost dragon. It was none other than the giant, Gracel. His chest had sunk in, his greyish-blue skin was pale, and the broadsword in his hand had web-like cracks. However, he still bravely faced his enemy. Gracel cleaved at his target like he was burning up his life, emitting light and warmth. Giants never retreat. Amidst his roar, Gracel parried the frost dragon's repeated blows, and he managed to dodge the ice-blue breath in time due to its maimed front claw. In prison, Franzia ran over and began to restrict the King of the North's actions. Edwina also worked in tandem with him. Once Ulysses' rage allowed it to escape the restraints, she triggered its emotions again, allowing the restriction to continue and prevent the charge from happening again. At this moment, Anderson switched between throwing burning white spears and fireballs. Again and again, he dealt severe damage to the frost dragon. After Mob managed to catch his breath, he continued stealing its thoughts or powers, stopping the frost dragon's attacks. Ulysses attempted to spread its wings a second time. It flew into the air a second time, sending snow flying, but with Franzia adding another flight restriction, it could only give up when it sensed the difficulty in doing so. Klein, who kept switching positions by its feet, gained a deeper control of its spirit body threads. It had long reached the 20-second threshold, but he failed to achieve success. This was because the King of the North's spirituality was extremely potent. After a while, there was a clang. Gracel's broadsword was tainted by the frost dragon's breath as he was struck by its claw. The former shattered completely, turning into countless fragments as they flew everywhere. With sputtering sounds, the invisible walls in front of Gracel reached their limit as they let through several fragments that impaled his head and chest. Franzia, who was similarly nearby, failed to dodge in time. The side of his armor collided with the fragments as his side was mangled. Giants never retreat. Gracel roared loudly once again. The light of dawn radiated from him once again as a sword made of pure light appeared in his palm. As the dark red blood on his face flowed, he parried the frost dragon's strike. At that moment, Klein was flicking the spirit body threads before he finally saw the opportunity to achieve initial control. 3 seconds, 2 seconds, 1 second. Ulysses' actions instantly froze as all its joints seemed to grow rust. The frost dragon immediately became alert and sensed that the source of the danger came from beneath it. Seizing the moment before its thoughts came to a complete halt, it instantly made the decision to sit down. It wanted to quash the despicable fella. Suddenly, its mind went adrift, having forgotten what it wanted to do. And about 20 meters away, Medzarost's knees buckled as he sat strangely on the snow. Klein took the opportunity to move his feet, walking to the side of the frost dragon's hind legs at a decent speed. His invisibility was beginning to wear off. After all, the mimicked ability definitely couldn't compare with the original. He extended his hands halfway as his spirituality jumped, his actions akin to controlling a huge puppet. Bang! Ulysses, whose thoughts were already slowing down, finally recalled what it wanted to do. Its hind legs slowly bent as its hefty figure smashed downwards, but all it did was send snow and dust flying. No good have to do that. Thoughts flashed through its mind sporadically as its heart suddenly contracted, condensing a terrifying light blue halo. This was the beyond power stemming from its life. It could create a cold hell. With this, Klein and company would completely freeze. If not for Snowman's experience and powers being capable of restraining that state, more than 1 or 2 beyonders would have died. However, with it under Klein's control, everything Ulysses tried to do was clearly impeded. Edwin acutely noticed the source of danger which she previously had no idea about. Immediately, she clenched her right fist, detonating the frost dragon's strong emotions. The King of the North's figure trembled in slow motion as the light blue halo that it had just converged scattered out of control. It failed to interfere with its environment. The frost dragon's mouth slowly opened as it let out a stuttering cry. Cyathus stood up with great difficulty the moment she recovered a little. Upon seeing the situation, she immediately held back her pain and drew her bow. Her hair flared up again as heavy dark clouds appeared in mid-air once again. 2 different silver bolts of lightning added radiance to each other as they surged onto the bow, forming a terrifying arrow that swirled with a bolt of lightning. Cyathus's face twisted as she released the arrow. The silver bolt of lightning instantly penetrated Ulysses' chest with a whoosh, tearing open a ghastly wound. Flames spewed and lightning bolts sparked inside its wound, causing greater damage. At that moment, Anderson's eyes lit up. A blazing white flame enveloped his body as he transformed into a stream of light, accurately shooting straight for the wound. Pitch black marks rapidly surfaced on the frost dragon's abdomen as though someone was scribbling over it. Ulysson's thoughts went slow due to the intense stimulation. As it struggled to flap its wings, it soared up into the sky. Flying is prohibited here. Franzir added more restrictions in a timely manner. Bang! King of the North fell to the ground again as its pitch black marks on its abdomen tore open. Light blue blood and damaged organs spewed out like a waterfall. Anderson took the opportunity to jump away from the dragon's body. The flames over his body had extinguished as a transparent layer of ice covered him. Cold, it's really cold. He held Death Grachide on as he stiffly jumped away. His body was constantly trembling. Klein, who had nearly allowed the frost dragon to escape his binding, achieved initial control again. He made Ulysson's thoughts of making everyone present die with it slow down as it suffered from theft and explosions. Its long neck slowly looked up as it let out a slow whimper as its body collapsed bit by bit. During this process, Klein didn't attempt to stop Seatters and company's continued attacks. He knew very well that to turn the frost dragon into a marionette needed far more than 5 minutes. There were too many accidents that could happen in that span of time. Franzir stood straight while panting. With the side of his body mangled, he pushed forward his swordless palm and declared in ancient Hermes, death. Ulysson's body trembled as it collapsed to the ground like a small mountain made of ice. Light blue light that was nearly white was released from its body as its flesh and body quickly disintegrated. Soon, the gigantic dragon corpse turned into a snow-laden heavy door that swung outwards. Without anyone mentioning it, all the Beyonders present knew that it was a door leading to the outside world. Finally success, Grissel laughed out loud as his voice grew softer. Thud, his nearly 4-meter-tall figure fell forward as he held himself up with a knee. Following that, the light of dawn around him scattered as his aura was almost immediately gone. Grissel, Seatters and company went over with great difficulty or great speed. Grissel looked around him slowly, clenching his fist as he gave a good-natured laugh. We succeeded. Giants never retreat. His head with a single vertical eye drooped down when his voice came to a halt. Grissel. Franzir, who was closest to the giant, rushed to Grissel and caught him. Then, he slowly released his grip and stood up, as though he had just experienced a confusing dream. Seatters tore out of Magd's arms, and ignoring the pain all over her body, she ran to Grissel's side with the aid of the wind. She bent down and carefully observed for a moment. Then, she nudged the giant and hysterically shouted, Wake up. Wake up. It's time for us to leave. Her voice softened into silence. Magd stood by the side, seeing the giant unable to maintain his body as it wavered. Finally, it fell to the ground with a thud. He fell silent for a few seconds before exhaling. At that moment, Anderson and Edwina had already run to Snowman. One used their flame, while the other mimicked holy light to quickly defrost him. As Klein was nearby, he directly arrived by Grissel's side. His spirit-body thread's vision told him that the giant was dead. Only his spirit lingered, but it was beginning to scatter. This made his damage transfer powers completely useless. From the moment Grissel ignited the light of dawn and engaged the frost dragon in a second battle, he must have prepared himself for death. Klein fell silent. Magd glanced at him and said with a rueful smile, To be frank, I've not seen many giants. Most of my impression of them had come from books, teachers, and parents. I always thought that this race was cruel and violent, unintelligent creatures who were closer to monsters. However, Grissel wasn't like that. He was frank, honest, and optimistic. Although he might appear rather silly, he knew better than anyone what was right and wrong. He told me that this was because he wasn't one of those ancient giants. He wasn't even a second or third generation giant. The cruel and violent giants similarly had the ability to reproduce and give birth. As for their descendants, there will be more rational ones appearing from time to time. These descendants would reproduce and have more descendants, allowing the entire giant race to escape from the confines of being monsters. Hair, I don't know if I should believe him, but his existence has proven the possibility. As Magd said that, he suddenly paused as though immersed in his memories. At that moment, Edna and Anderson helped Snowman, whose body was still a little stiff, walk over. The ascetic struggled as he walked to Grissel's side. Looking at the tightly closed zinc eye, Snowman gestured the sign of the cross on his chest. He half closed his eyes as he whispered a prayer. Father of all things, the great source of everything, he lies an honest and pure soul, may he enter your kingdom and receive eternal redemption. Seatters opened her mouth as though she wanted to say that Grissel's faith was in giant King Ormir, but she ultimately chose to keep silent. She watched in silence as Snowman completed the prayer. We have to leave as quickly as possible. No one knows how long this door will remain open, the elvish songster said as she surveyed the surroundings. Her sorrow and pain left her rather quick-tempered. She looked down at the giant and added in a heavy voice, We can't let Grissel's soul dissipate in this illusory world. We have to bring him back to reality. All right, Magd immediately agreed. Klein and company didn't object either. Edwina turned her head and shouted at the mounting cave of ice and snow. Danitz, you can come out now. At that moment, Seatters' eyes darted around as though she had recalled something. She turned her head and said to Klein, Do you have a pen and paper? Yes. Klein took out the fountain pen and notes he brought around with him. This was a professional trait of being a seer. Seatters received it and began scribbling on it. She didn't stop, even when Danitz ran out of the cave. Danitz kept silent. He was also in low spirits as well, lacking the joy and excitement he should have with the pending departure from this book world. Finally, Seatters stopped writing and handed the paper and pen to Klein. The formula you wanted. Aren't we completing the trade only after leaving? Klein mumbled silently in puzzlement. He received the pen and the ocean songster potion formula. As though sensing his puzzlement, Seatters turned her head and looked at Grissel. She said with a heavy voice, We are now companions. So you can give me the potion formula directly? Klein put the items away and nodded indiscernibly. I'll give you the wine cup after we leave. Seatters didn't respond. Instead, she nudged him a bit. Bring Grissel along. Magd looked down at his body, which wasn't too muscular, and his sharp, curvy leather boots. He gave a bitter smile of helplessness and walked to Grissel's thigh. Franzir silently followed as he bent down to embrace the giant's left shoulder. Anderson looked around and tsked. All of you are injured or weak. Let me do it. He then lifted up Grissel's other shoulder. Klein was just about to help with the other thigh when Danitz rushed over to take the spot. Upon seeing this, he stopped in his tracks. He then watched Anderson and company lift Grissel as they walked towards the illusory snow-laden door. Klein, Edwina, Seatters, who stumbled as she walked, and Snowman silently followed beside them before they arrived at the exit formed from Ulysson's corpse. At that moment, Klein surveyed the area and discovered that the light blue blood that flowed out from the King of the North had vanished. It was as though it had never existed. Indeed, it's a conjured monster that's almost real. Klein walked behind as he watched Edwina take a few steps forward as she bent her back, placing her palms on the door. Then, Vice Admiral Iceberg exerted her strength and pushed open the snow-laden door. Silently, everyone saw everything disappear after turning illusory then transparent. Rows of brownish-yellow bookshelves quickly appeared before their eyes, along with the orange-yellow sun which had just set below the horizon and a desk with a fountain pen, ink bottle, and paper. This was Vice Admiral Iceberg Edwina's cabin. Klein quickly placed the middle of the table in his sights. Sitting on it was a book filled with yellowish-brown goatskin. The book flipped to the end as a result of a formless wind. Klein and company then saw the epilogue. With the help of the crazy adventurer and the strongest adventurer, Grissel fulfilled his promise. He led his teammates and slayed the King of the North, but he also ended up sleeping forever in the Nation of Frost. It didn't even give our ending. Seatters, where do you plan on heading to next? Mugged released Grissel's fire as he turned his head to ask the elvish songster. Seatters' eyes seemed to glaze over for a few seconds before she firmly said, "Seek out my race." Just as she said that, she suddenly saw Mob's flaxen-colored hair rapidly turn white. His originally smooth face had obvious wrinkles. In just a second, Mob was dying of old age. Seatters' heart tightened. Just as she was about to lunge forward, she was surprised to realize that she had lost the strength in her legs at some point in time. With a thud, she fell to the ground and realized that the back of her hands were covered in the aged spots of an elder. She instantly understood what was happening as tears immediately flowed down her face. She struggled as she attempted to crawl towards Mob. Mob had similarly slumped to the ground as he crawled towards her while extending his right palm. Seatters reached out her right palm and grabbed the wrinkled and thin hand. They raised their heads with great difficulty as their pupils reflected one another. The corners of their mouths curled up simultaneously before loosening weakly. Their eyelids drooped down and blocked out the light. Klein, Edwina, Anderson, and Nitz failed to react in time to such changes. They had no idea what they could do as they helplessly watched Grissel's corpse rapidly rot as his flesh and blood evaporated, leaving his skeleton beyond the characteristic. As for Mob, Seatters, Snowman, and Franzier, they aged in seconds before breathing their last breath and repeating whatever had happened to Grissel's corpse. Their clothes had either disappeared or turned to dust. Their souls dispersed at extraordinary speeds before they were gone. Even the one who lived inside the book for the shortest time had been there for 165 years, Edwina muttered softly as she turned her head to look at black bones which faced the sea and sun. It was none other than disciplinary Paladin Franzier. He was sitting on a chair looking west, where Backlund was. Snowman was seated cross-legged to the side. His corpse maintained the posture of praying. That's right, they've lived in the book world for centuries or millennia. With the rules of the outside world, as non-demigods, they should have died long ago. I should have realized this. Why wasn't I wary of this point at all? Could it be Klein suddenly recalled the psychological influence on Mob, Grissel, and company as he began having an idea? He once again looked down at the book bound by goatskin. He believed that it was many, many more secrets. This fellow is rather interesting. He died just like that. Anderson looked at Mob's corpse as he smirked. At that moment, all the beyond the characteristics had slowly condensed. However, Franzier didn't produce anything similar to that. Edmund observed for a moment before softly saying, the potion he consumed was illusory, likewise for the strength he obtained. It's just like that frost dragon. It was likely conjured in the book world. It was almost real. Klein sighed silently. He was momentarily at a loss for words, so all he could do was maintain Gemma Sparrow's silence. In the next 10 minutes, no one spoke in the captain's cabin of the Golden Dream until the four beyond the characteristics took form. One of them was the size of a fist resembling a heart. It was covered with holes as it shimmered with the light of dawn. Another resembled a jellyfish. Its translucent exterior seemed to contain azure blue sea water, and inside it were vortices that were occasionally stirred by hurricanes or flashing silver lightning while emitting a faint, ethereal song. Another was a pure, bright crystal that exuded holiness. The last was a baby's palm with 5 thin stretched out fingers as it kept changing colors due to the environment. Sigh, we can't just keep watching like this. Finally, Anderson broke the silence. Let's split the beyond the characteristics. Just as Edwina's light blue eyes were dyed with pangs of fire, the hunter shrugged and said with a wry smile, I believe that they'll have wishes such as this. As we were companions who fought together, seeing Edwina's gaze warm up, Anderson curled the sides of his mouth and shook his head with a sigh. You're always so inflexible. That's why you aren't able to become an artist your entire life. After sighing again, he looked at the corpse on the chair. We can't keep watching. We have to do something. Doesn't Seatters wish to find her race? Let's bury her near an elvish ruin in Sonny Island. But looks like he wants to be with Seatters. We should bury them in the same tomb. Doesn't Franzier want to return to Backland? Burn his remains to ashes, store the ashes in a box, and bring it to the city when possible. If time permits it, then someone can look for his descendants. As for Snowman, it's not known if he believes in the ancient sun god or the original creator. Who knows if the two are the same? Hey, to us, it's the same. There's definitely no way to find the corresponding cathedrals or altars. Therefore, the only thing we can do is bury him beside Grissel. Grissel he wishes to return to the giant king's court, but that's a city in myths and legends. There's no way to find it in the real world. However, there are giant ruins in the northern and southern continent. We can bury him there and allow him to have a proper burial. Giant King's Court. Backland. Klein listened in silence as he deliberated for a few seconds. Leave the ashes of Grissel, Snowman, and Franzier with me. He believed that in the time to come, the City of Silver would manage to reach the Giant King's Court. When that happened, he could hand Grissel's and Snowman's ashes to Little Sun and allow him to bury the two ancient figures. As for Backland, Klein needed to return to it, as it was the final destination of his travels. He could then bring back Franzier, who had left his hometown for more than 165 years. Edwin added, the Golden Dream often goes to Sonny Island. I'll handle Sonny Island and its remains. All right, you'll be in charge of the cremation later. Anderson turned to look at Dernitz as he chuckled and sighed. Look, everyone plays a part in this. There's no need to feel inferior. He originally imagined that Dernitz wouldn't understand his consoling and would glare at him angrily. To his surprise, this well-known pirate's expression turned heavy as he nodded in silence. As companions who faced the King of the North together, let's each choose one. Treat it as though we're inheriting their legacy. Anderson gestured at the shimmering items on the floor. Hey, these beyond the characteristics definitely have remnants of their psyche. I wonder what kind of influence they will bring. Be it concocting it into a potion for consumption or getting an artisan to craft it into an item, there should be something special about them. The former can be digested with the acting method, but nothing can be done about the latter. From the looks of it, you don't know the acting method. Treat it as though I didn't say a thing. The last two lines were said to the Nitz. Klein didn't have the mood to lampoon Anderson. He looked at the four beyond the characteristics and said, give Seatters to me. This was the main ingredient of an ocean songster. Edwina thought for a moment before saying, I'll take Snowman's. It corresponded to the Priest of Light which Klein already had one of. Hence, he didn't choose it. Anderson glanced at the remaining two beyond the characteristics as his gaze paused at the strange item that resembled a baby's palm. I have to say that this guy is very interesting. Perhaps it can be made into a mystical item that can talk to me. That way, everyone wouldn't be too lonely. At that moment, the giant's heart didn't have an owner. Klein glanced at the Nitz and indifferently said, It's yours. Mine. I didn't do anything. I didn't participate in the battle. The Nitz was extremely surprised. Klein said simply, You scouted and took on a risk. To Klein, this was a form of compensation. This was because the Nitz had chanted the fool's honorific name and knew Gem and Sparrow's secret. Therefore, he had to force the faith of the fool on him, otherwise, it would only leave latent risks. Although this was a risk which the Nitz was willing to take, Klein still wished to compensate him. Of course, he hoped that the Nitz would view it as a bestowment from the fool. And regardless of exchanging Grassel's beyond the characteristic for money, using it to purchase the corresponding formula and ingredients, or making it into a defensive mystical item, all of them would be very useful for the Nitz. Take it, Edwina said as she looked at the Nitz. All right, the Nitz nodded after a few seconds of silence. After distributing them, Klein took a few steps forward and bent his back to pick up Seatus's beyond the characteristic. Looking at the azure blue sea water sloshing inside the translucent membrane, he could vaguely hear the elf's beautiful singing. Just as he stood up, he saw the Nitz nodding as though he was responding to a question. However, no one had spoken. Klein's gaze swept past Edwina's expressionless face and suspected if this mysticism magister was communicating with the Nitz in a way others couldn't hear. Seeing the Nitz give an affirmative answer, Edwina reached out to pick up Grassel's travels from the desk and closed it. She then handed it to Klein. This is a token of my gratitude. Without me, all of you would have defeated the Frost Dragon. Klein didn't reach out his hand as he looked at the book comprised of yellowish-brown goatskin. No, we definitely would have died. We had no way to defend against the King of the North's final frenzy. Besides, you were taking a huge risk entering the book. Edwina was like a teacher, explaining to him the reasons in a serious manner. And my only request is that you will tell me the answers if you figure out its origins and principles. Klein was very curious about the secrets hidden in Grassel's travels. He couldn't reject the offer as he reached out to take the magical book. Okay, at this moment, the importance of the Giant King's court became more obvious. He even thought of buying the black iron key belonging to the giants and was worth £5,000 while he was at it. However, he didn't immediately make the request to prevent Edwina from thinking that he was trying to fleece her. He prepared to wait a few more hours, or perhaps tomorrow, before borrowing the key from Vice Admiral Iceberg. He would head above the grey fog to divine its worth before offering to purchase it. Seeing Anderson and the Nitz pick up their beyond the characteristics, Edwina glanced at the darkening sky and said to Klein, Where are you heading to next? Bayam, Klein replied frankly. Edwina nodded. You can head there on the Golden Dream. We have plenty of rooms. Klein nodded indiscernibly as he agreed. Who wouldn't want a free ride? After dealing with the remains and cleaning up the captain's cabin, Edwina walked to the door and opened it. There were gasps of pleasant surprise as the moon in the corridor turned jubilant. All right, it's fine now. Edwina looked around as a smile formed from her cold expression. The crew cheered loudly, making Anderson stroke his chin and frown. It's more exaggerated than I imagined, without a doubt. His words were drowned by the ebullient cheers. After everything came to an end, Klein and Anderson left the captain's cabin under the Nitz's lead and headed for other rooms on the same level. Half turning his body to look where they were, Anderson suddenly sighed. Is that it? Although we didn't get to know each other for more than half an hour, people who fought alongside you often leave a deep impression. But to think they suddenly died in a baffling manner. All of them. Klein was silent for 2 seconds before saying, This world is filled with baffling deaths to begin with. That's right. Anderson immediately smiled. That's why optimism is needed to enjoy life. If I were to face death one day, I'll definitely be composed and cool, not losing my elegance at all. I would face it in the most handsome manner possible. Don't raise flags for yourself. Klein didn't say a word as he entered the room that it's opened for him. Anderson took the room beside him. In the room, Klein stood at the window as he silently watched the darkening sea for nearly 10 minutes. Then, he entered the bathroom, took 4 steps counterclockwise, recited the incantation, and went above the grey fog. Sitting at the high-back chair of the fool, he conjured the world's figure and made him make a praying pose. Honorable Mr. Fool, please inform the sun that I've obtained the sequence 6 notary potion formula he wants. I also have clues to the Priest of Light formula and main ingredients. He can delay payment by putting it on credit and pay for it in the future. Klein was doing this to prepare for his advancement to sequence 4. The city of Silver had rich resources, so it was possible that particular main ingredients or difficult supplementary ingredients that were hard to come across would exist over there. Therefore, with him in no rush to get anything, he planned on letting Little Sun know him. The reason why he didn't say that he had obtained the main ingredients and potion formula for Priest of Light was because he felt that it was too exaggerated. He planned on telling him once Little Sun was more or less done digesting the potion. After checking the conjured scene twice, he transmitted it into the crimson star representing the sun as a stream of light. Afternoon town. Having just finished patrolling the periphery of the newly established camp, Derek's vision suddenly blurred, and he saw an endless grey fog and an indistinct figure praying inside a dark red glow. Immediately following that, he heard the world's voice and learned that his notary potion formula had been acquired. Mr. World's efficiency is really high. It's the exact number of days that he promised. Furthermore, he even got clues to the Priest of Light potion formula and main ingredients. Derek felt joy after a moment of alarm. He couldn't help but admire the world, wishing that he would possess similar strength and styles in the future. Above the grey fog, the busy the world made another prayer after Mr. Fool confirmed that there weren't any problems with the Ocean Songster potion formula. Honorable Mr. Fool, please inform Mr. Hanged Man that I've already obtained the Ocean Songster's potion formula and the corresponding main ingredient. I'll give it to him during the next tarot gathering. Please get him to consider what he would like to provide in exchange, on the undulating sea, inside an ancient and dark sailboat. Alger Wilson stood in front of the window, considering the report he had to produce when he arrived at Paju Island. It was at that moment when the endless grey fog and the figure lording over him appeared. He then saw a dark red glow and saw a blurry figure resembling the world. He then heard the figure's calm words. After hearing it, Alger's eyes widened. He found it difficult to suppress his joy as a strong sense of bewilderment and shock emerged within his heart. He remembered very clearly that the world had only promised the sun to obtain the notary potion formula within 3 days of the last Tarot Club gathering. He hadn't mentioned anything related to the Ocean Songster potion formula, but in just days, this gentleman had obtained the rare Sequence 5 formula and even its main ingredient. What did he do exactly? Alger muttered silently to himself as he couldn't help but recall Gem and Sparrow's cold and formidable appearance. He found the man more and more unfathomable. Is this the advantage of being a blessed? Yes, I just received the news yesterday that Gem and Sparrow boarded the Future last week in Mars. On the one hand, it proves that Admiral of Stars is indeed the hermit, and on the other hand, it means that what the world did last week was extremely important. For example, entering those dangerous waters in the Eastern Front to obtain something. Therefore, he had no choice but to seek the hermit's help. As such, he advanced and became a Sequence 5 powerhouse. This can explain how he obtained the Ocean Songs to Potion formula and its main ingredient in the span of a few days, but what did he do exactly? Don't tell me that he killed someone from the middle upper echelons of the church. Alger couldn't help but frown. He quickly calmed his heart as he focused on another matter. Although instantly obtaining the formula and main ingredient delighted and excited him, making him feel that becoming a Tarot Club member was a turning point in his life, he still needed to pay for it. What can I give the world? Alger fell into deep thought, depressed to realize that he didn't have any items or money of equal value. He subconsciously paced about his window. Above the grey fog, the busy world vanished as Klein cast his eyes on Grassel's travels, which he had brought above the grey fog. This book, comprised of yellowish-brown goatskin, was silently placed on a long bronze table. It didn't appear special in any way, appearing so ordinary that only history fans would notice it. Klein conjured a pen and paper as he cautiously wrote the first divination statement. This is the Spectator Pathway's uniqueness. He was most worried about this point, as it meant that he couldn't seal the book above the grey fog. It might bring about unexpected accidents, but carrying it with him made it possible for him to be sucked into the book at any time. That would be very problematic. He undid the spirit pendulum on his left wrist, composed himself, and attempted a divination. When he opened his eyes, the topaz pendant was spinning counterclockwise. It meant a negative result. From the looks of it, this strange book isn't the Spectator Pathway's uniqueness. Then, there's no need to be too afraid. Klein thought for a few seconds before divining if Grassel's travels was the corresponding item of the Spectator Pathway's sequence 102. To his surprise, the divination ended in a failure. He thought for a long while before penning a new divination statement, its origins. The reason why Klein dared to do such a divination was because he knew very well that the Spectator Pathway's sequence 0 had long perished. There was a high chance that the uniqueness was in the hands of the Twilight Hermit Order. Therefore, the chances of him having to face a real god was negligible. Putting down the pen and holding the paper and book, Klein leaned back into the chair and recited the divination statement as he entered a dream with cogitation. The grey, hazy world cracked open as the sky turned extremely dark. It was as though strong winds were stirring the dark clouds. In this dark environment, a sliver of light appeared first along the horizon as it grew bigger and clearer. It was a floating continent. It was a huge continent that could hold several cities. The continent's periphery was greyish-white in color. Huge boulders revealed their outlines, and above them, there were dozens of erect 100-meter-tall stone columns. They either stood independently or propped up magnificent ancient palaces. Dragons of different colors, greyish-white, scarlet-red, yellowish-bronze, as well as some made of ice, were flying over the continent and a one-of-a-kind city. At times, they would land on a stone column to rest as they overlooked the land. At other times, they would enter the opulent palace and vanish from Klein's sight. Among them, the smallest one was about the size of King of the North Ulysses. The biggest spanned 100 meters. The scene quickly zoomed in as a palace with a height of over 200 meters occupied Klein's vision. Its interior had stone columns erected, propping up a dome. The space was so large that it allowed any dragon to move freely within. The camera kept moving inward, and soon, Klein saw a book made of yellowish-brown goatskin. Its cover was blank as it floated in mid-air. Compared to its surroundings, it was amazingly small. Right behind the book, a large shadow appeared. Just as the shadow's silhouette was outlined, Klein felt his thoughts instantly explode. His eyes spewed out with blood as his ears were left with two black holes. His mouth and nostrils had white matter stained with blood spew out from them. The mysterious space above the grey fog gently trembled as it pacified everything. Klein quickly recovered as he gritted his teeth and rubbed his head. It hurts. It freaking hurts. It's in no way inferior to the eternal blazing sun. I didn't even discern his looks or gain any knowledge. Was he dragon of imagination and cute? According to Little Sun's information, he had perished at the end of the second epoch. After so many epochs, spanning 2 to 3 millennia, just prying into the mystery was enough to put me in such a sorry state. If not for the grey fog's screening and assistance, I would have died immediately. This mark is way too powerful, isn't it? There's no way of comparing them. Its damage is inferior to the previous encounter with the eternal blazing sun, but one had died long ago, while the other is still alive. It just begs the question if the ancient gods are stronger than the real gods of the present day. Using nearly a minute to recover from the pain, Klein recast his gaze on Grassel's travels. He tapped the mottled table's edge and muttered silently, "This book's author is Dragon of Imagination and Cute. A book written by an ancient god, a storybook that can automatically deduce the ending. What is his goal? When this book was formed, the Dragon of Imagination likely hadn't encountered the ancient sun god and was fine. After all, it would take some time to go from the City of Miracles, Leipzig, to the Giant King's Court. And before Grissel was swallowed by the book, the Giant King's Court was clearly still in existence. Just a prank, a toy used to kill his boredom. Or could it be that the Dragon of Imagination had foreseen some of the future? He specially created this book to leave behind the chance for himself or the dragons to resurrect. However, he underestimated the ancient sun god's might, and he completely perished. It made the book unusable for millennia, so all it could do was naturally absorb characters into it to play out a story. Klein made some guesses, but he wasn't able to verify them. After some consideration, he thought of finding a chance to enter the book in search for clues. In the future, I can enter as a spirit body above the grey fog. Once I encounter any trouble, I'll immediately return. Yes, I'll make the attempt after I'm no longer with Edna and Anderson. I have to be careful and cautious. Klein nodded as he divined if leaving Grissel's travels above the grey fog would bring undesirable changes to the mysterious space. But he was met with failure again. As for the reason, he actually knew why. This was a place that transcended the spirit world. Divining about matters involving this area naturally failed if attempts were made to obtain revelations from the spirit world. After deciding to frequently come above the grey fog to take a look so as to prevent any accidents, Klein threw Grissel's travels into the junk pile. He then waved his hand, summoning a golden wine cup that had been partially flattened. The cup had complicated patterns engraved on it, with the elvish phrases Calamity and Kahinam. Apart from that, there wasn't anything special. With it in hand, Klein silently rubbed it for a few seconds. Knock, knock, knock. Klein politely knocked on the door to the captain's cabin. Is there something? Edwina, who had let down her hair, looked at Gem and Sparrow and asked. Klein handed over the Elf Queen's golden wine cup. Put this in Seatus's tomb. All right. Edwina fell silent for 2 seconds before nodding and receiving it. She habitually studied the engravings and symbols on the cup before withdrawing her gaze in embarrassment. She then looked out the window and said, "They'll be organizing a bonfire party. Will you be participating?" No, Klein shook his head. I understand. I don't plan on participating either. Not everyone is like Anderson, who can quickly raise his spirits, Edwina said with pursed lips. Actually, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Klein was momentarily at a loss for a response. And apart from giving lessons, Edwina wasn't good at socializing. Immediately, the two of them fell silent. About 10 seconds later, Klein silently inhaled and broke the silence. Are you selling that key that originates from the giants? Yes, Edwina thought about it before glancing at her collector's room. She added, I can lend it to you for studying. You can decide whether to buy it before leaving the ship. You didn't even need me to mention it. I was still a little embarrassed to raise the subject. Klein secretly heaved a sigh of relief. After considering Gem and Sparrow's persona, he calmly said, I do not take advantage of others. Just as he said that, he felt a little regretful. He was afraid that Vice Admiral Iceberg would really change her mind. Edwina's light blue eyes moved slightly as she said, the only condition is that you have to tell me the answer to anything you figure out. Few Klein didn't harp on the issue as he nodded. Okay. About a minute later, he carried an iron black key the size of a heptacord. And at that moment, there was a series of fervent singing from the deck. Your eyes are so mesmerizing that it feels like the light from dawn. When night comes and the sun has gone down, I almost start feeling melancholy, fervently awaiting your light. Oh, your eyes are so mesmerizing that it feels like the light from dawn. 1. Klein subconsciously went to the window and looked out. He saw that the bonfire had already been lit, and the Golden Dreams crew, that had nothing to do on their hands, were gathered around it. They were either roasting meat or fish as they guzzled beer. Otherwise, they would be dancing a rather random but lively dance alongside singer Orpheus singing. It was a very merry atmosphere. The oily roasting exuded a tantalizing aroma that wafted upwards. Klein saw that Anderson Hood was also among the pirates, drinking in high spirits and eating happily. From time to time, he would shout a few words and say a joke, as though he was already a member of the Golden Dream. He was no longer ostracized like before. Instead, Dönitz didn't appear among them. At the very least, Klein didn't see him near Iron Skim Barrel. As long as he doesn't provoke others, Anderson is rather good at socializing. This might be the intelligence-gathering powers of a conspirator. Yes, he might have transferred the hatred onto me. I wonder if Dönitz will work hard after what happened. If he can improve himself and acquire greater strength, then as the fool, I wouldn't only have myself as a subordinate. I don't have to always appear as a trinity. Hey, this secret existence of mine finally has a real believer, someone I can directly order to do things, even though it's only limited to Dönitz. I have to say, it's still quite pathetic. As Klein reflected over the matter, he prepared a ritual to sacrifice the giant's key above the grey fog. At that moment, his spiritual perception was triggered as he instinctively activated his spirit vision and looked to the side. White bones were thrown up as they materialized into the messenger with black flames in its eye sockets. Half of the messenger's body was in the lower deck, so it was nearly level with Gem and Sparrow without tearing through the ceiling. However, the palm holding the letter remained huge, as though it could easily wrap it around Klein's head. Mr. Azite was quite quick to reply this time as Klein politely nodded. He received the letter and unfolded it. Just as he was about to read its contents, he suddenly realized that the skeleton messenger remained standing there. It didn't vanish once it delivered the letter. Is there something? Klein asked in surprise. Just as he said that, an idea flashed through his mind as he quickly added, if there's a need to reply, then I will summon you again. The skeleton messenger's huge head nodded as its body collapsed like a waterfall before returning to the underworld. Mamrie and Etinek previously waited for me to give a reply. Same for the skeleton messenger. This time is this some new regulation the messenger world is enacted? Pyre, there's no such thing as a messenger world. They're all individually summoned, and most messengers are just doing it part-time. Yes. The skeleton messenger gave me an aggrieved feeling. Klein shook his head without much thought before focusing his attention on Mr. Azite's letter. To put it simply, attaining godhood begins from the moment one advances to sequence 4. It's a slow process of evolution towards a mythical creature. This process comes to an end at sequence 2. Therefore, there is a qualitative difference between an angel and a saint. In ancient times, the former are even called subsidiary gods. Every demigod, including saints and angels, have their own mythical state. This is an human form which is a potpourri of complex knowledge, godhood characteristics, and secret symbols. Ordinary people will suffer tremendous damage from a simple glance, to the point of losing their minds. And as the demigod grows in strength, the damage only grows more potent and irresistible. Therefore, creatures at this level have to constantly control themselves to not expose this form, or just from their very existence alone, it can bring about a catastrophe to their surroundings. To demigods, one of the main traits of losing control is losing reason. When that happens, they will no longer be able to restrain their mythical creature form. However, a saint's mythical form isn't complete. There are clear characteristics of their original race. Strictly speaking, one is a true mythical creature only after they reach sequence 2. I wonder if the blood the man hermit wants is the blood of a mythical creature in the true sense of the phrase, or if the criteria can be relaxed. Hey, I wonder if the placenta blood from Will or Septon's birth counts. He is a sequence 1 snake of fate, an absolute mythical creature, just not in the correct form. I'll accumulate more matters before writing on the paper train to ask him. Yes, there are only 2 more times, so I need to do it for serious matters. However, I'll be returning to back London with this in mind. Klein silently calculated when Will or Septon would be born. He didn't make an accurate recollection, but based on his impressions, Will or Septon had been conceived last November, and it was currently only the middle of April. Therefore, he will be born in July. Perhaps earlier. Klein thought without great certainty. After all, he didn't have a girlfriend or wife in his previous life, much less having a child. He quickly threw those thoughts to the back of his mind and began setting up the ritual. He sacrificed the giant's key to himself. The reason why he didn't use his spirit body to carry it, it was simply because it was too heavy. Soon, he arrived above the grey fog. He made the iron black key fly onto the surface of the bronze table as he seriously inspected it a few times. After confirming that there wasn't anything abnormal about it, he conjured a pen and paper and wrote the divination statement, the place this key corresponds to. With the paper in hand and his arm around the key, Klein leaned back into his chair and fell asleep while chanting. This time, the grey, hazy world first presented a distorted translucent screen. As the scene zoomed in, he immediately appeared before a 10-meter-tall door. The door was mainly blue in color, and on its sides were various engraved symbols, labels, and patterns. They were stately and mysterious. The light of dusk shone over faintly, dyeing the door with a clear sense of decline. It was like the daylight was gone for the world, with only eternal darkness replacing it. Right on the heels of that, Klein noticed that the opening in the door's left side, at a height of 3 to 4 meters, there was a pitch-black socket which was equivalent to an adult's fist. The scene quickly shattered as Klein opened his eyes. A door similar to the Black Cloisters but of a different color. The light of dusk. My interpretation is that it represents a particular door of the Giant King's court. Yes. The first distorted translucent screen should be the barrier between the forsaken land of the gods and the outside world. Therefore, without the greatest eliminating interference, there's no way to see the scene via divination. Klein tapped on the edge of the mottled table as he made judgment. He had already decided to buy the giant's key. After going through the hassle of bringing £5,000 in cash back to the real world, Klein tidied the items on the table and held a thick stack of cash. He left his room once again and walked to the captain's cabin. Hey, as a desire apostle, T. Shazer's bounty is equivalent to a key and £1,000. Klein glanced at the cash in his hand as he knocked on Vice Admiral Iceberg's door again. With a creak, Edwin appeared by the door. When she saw him holding the cash, her brows twitched as she widened her eyes. She said with a bright-eyed expression, "You have results?" Klein tersely acknowledged. "I already obtained results that it's likely related to the Giant King's court." "The Giant King's court has spoken in myths?" Edwina's eyes lit up as she asked. Klein gently nodded in affirmation. Edwina's lips quivered as though she wished to inquire further, but ultimately, she didn't say a word. She took the £5,000 in cash. She turned back to look at the rows of bookshelves in the captain's cabin and fell silent. She finally said to Klein seconds later, "If you're interested in these books, you can borrow them any time in the day. My only request is." Klein secretly predicted what Vice Admiral Iceberg was about to say. "And my only request is that you can talk to me about history whenever you're free." Edwina paused before she added with her eyes appearing bright. Klein chuckled inwardly and said after some thought, "All right, but I will not answer every question." Meanwhile, he silently prayed inwardly, "Let's hope Vice Admiral Iceberg's collection has methods to create higher-level charms." "No problem." The corner of Edwina's mouth twitched as her expression became livelier. "See you tomorrow." Klein took off his hat and pressed it to his chest as he bowed to bid farewell. Edwina also seriously returned the pleasantries. "See you tomorrow." Backland, Iron Gate Street, outside Braveheart's bar. Emlyn White got off the carriage, pushed open a wooden door, and walked in. He was then triggered by the mixture of smells inside as he pinched his nose in contempt. He hadn't had much progress in the competition to hunt for the primordial moon believers. Therefore, he planned on heading to the Braveheart's bar, which Sherlock Moriarty often mentioned. He was there to find the rather informed black market arms dealer, Ian. The latter's name was acquired by Emlyn through other means. Turning his body to the side, Emlyn avoided the bulldozing drunkard. While swatting his clothes with a frown, he continued jostling towards the bar counter. During this process, he didn't seem to be doing anything, but the surrounding customers would always fail to touch him. Be it in terms of speed, agility, or his balance and coordination, he had reached a rather terrifying level. Finally, Emlyn arrived at the bar counter as he rapped the wooden counter. "Where's Ian?" The bartender glanced at him. Without a word, he kept his head low and wiped his glass cups. Emlyn stood there in surprise, wondering if he had done something wrong that earned him nothing. This angered him a little as he wished to reach out and yank the bartender out. However, he believed that such acts were lacking as a gentleman. He forcefully held down his emotions and looked around and discovered that everyone was drinking. With a thought, Emlyn experimented by saying, "A cup of Ormia red wine." The bartender's actions paused as he looked up and gave the handsome, black-haired, red-eyed man an odd look. "We don't have that available." This was the finest red wine in the world. The price was staggering. Emlyn wasn't dumb, and he could tell from the bartender's eyes that he had ordered something he shouldn't have. "On careful thought," he said, "1 glass of Southville beer. 5 pence." The bartender finally lowered the cup and cloth. Emlyn took out a 1 solly note and said, "Keep the change." "Thank you." The bartender pointed left and said, "Ian is in card room 1. Emlyn immediately smiled, feeling happy and proud that he had resolved an actual problem. He didn't take the cup of Southville beer and, instead, turned around and walked straight to card room 1. Knock, knock, knock. He politely knocked on the door. "Please come on in," a rather adolescent voice sounded. Emlyn adjusted his collar and pushed open the door, only to realize that the scene inside was unlike what he had expected. He believed that since it was a card room, there would be a bunch of people surrounding a long table, playing games like Texas, but to his surprise, there were indeed about 8 people. But there weren't any poker cards. A piece of paper was placed in front of every participant as they seemed to be recording something. Apart from that, there were only fountain pens and multi-faced dice on the table. Emlyn instinctively cast his gaze on the youngest person inside. It was similarly a handsome boy with red eyes. He looked about 16. "Ian?" Emlyn asked. Ian nodded with a smile. "That's me. Sir, is there something I can help you with? Or do you wish to join our game?" "Game?" Emlyn returned with a question. Ian chuckled. "Yes, game. I don't enjoy playing cards or billiards, but something needs to be done when spending the whole day here. I gained some inspiration from Emperor Assel's biography. It's to organize a few people to sit down and attempt a tabletop adventure. In this game, as long as you abide by the rules, you can be anyone, a doctor, an adventurer who loves eating vegetables, a private detective who always carries a wrench and pipe, or an adventurer who enjoys radical ideas. Together, they can head to some ancient castle and seek out the history hidden within, battling all kinds of monsters along the way. Sounds a little interesting." Emlyn had a feeling that this game suited him well. "Ha ha, do you want to join? We are currently embroiled in a ploy and are facing a powerful ancient vampire. He appears to have a handsome face, but beneath his skin are boils formed from his boiling blood." Ian warmly invited him. "Sanguine, thank you very much." Emlyn's expression twitched indiscernibly as he directly said, "I have a mission for you." "All right, let's go to the room next door." Ian took his round hat and old satchel and stood up. The billiard room next door had no one in it. The boy closed the door with great familiarity as he surveyed the area before looking at Emlyn. "Sir, I do not know you. Might I know who introduced you?" Emlyn lifted his chin and smiled. "Sherlock Moriarty." Just as he said that, he suddenly looked left and right as he raised his hand to pinch his nose. "So it's Detective Moriarty." Ian heaved a sigh of relief without hiding it. "I'm assured then. By the way, didn't he go on vacation to Desire Bay? When will he be back?" Emlyn lowered his right hand as he said without a change in expression, "He isn't back yet. I've been to his rented apartment. To be frank, a normal vacation should have ended by the end of January. It's already April. Could it be that something happened to him?" Ian asked worriedly. Emlyn recalled the powers and mysteriousness which Sherlock Moriarty presented as he shook his head. Perhaps he's caught up in a complicated case. Ian didn't speak further as he asked, "How may I address you? What mission do you have?" "You can call me Mr. White." Emlyn took out a piece of paper that resembled a bounty notice. "Help me find these 5 people." Ian received it and carefully flipped through it for a while. £20 for an effective clue, £150 for an exact location. "Is that acceptable?" "No problem." Emlyn felt that the price was just too cheap. Compared to this, the prices seen at the Tarot Club were way more exaggerated. Ian folded the piece of paper and said, "Mr. White, how do I contact you if I have any clues?" "South of the bridge, Harvest Church." Emlyn had already thought of the answer. Upon hearing that, Ian gave him an odd look. You're a believer of Mother Earth? That's rare in Bagland. I'm not. Emlyn firmly shook his head. I'm only doing volunteer work over there. Without waiting for Ian to speak, he asked, how did you inherit those red eyes? This was something he had wished to ask when he first saw Ian. This was because red eyes were a trademark characteristic of Sanguine in ancient times. However, there was a long period of time when humans and Sanguine copulated in the Fourth Epoch. They were all residents of an empire. Hence, with the widespread fellowship, many descendants were produced. There was an increasing number of red-eyed mixed bloods as they passed down their genes, becoming an uncommon eye color for humans. To put it simply, every red-eyed human had a Sanguine ancestor. Ian replied in surprise, my father, I've no idea how much further up the family tree, as I was a vagabond. From the looks of it, he isn't connected to the Sanguine. Emlyn handed over a £20 deposit, feeling somewhat disappointed before turning to leave the billiard room. After he left, Ian didn't immediately return to the card room. Instead, he closed the door and said into the air, Detective Moriarty hasn't returned to Bagland. I'm a little worried about him. A figure suddenly appeared in the billiard room. She had a pale face with exquisite features while wearing a black bonnet. Dressed in a black Gothic regal dress, she was none other than Wraith Sharon. He's doing fine, Sharon replied without any perturbation in her tone. Her figure materialized before vanishing. You always says the same thing. Don't tell me that you've always been in contact with Detective Moriarty, Ian mumbled softly as he picked up a newspaper in the corner of the billiard room. Placed on it was the Tussock Times, and beneath it was News at Sea. The latter was mainly used to report the situations of the different colonies of the Lowen Kingdom and matters at sea, but due to technological restrictions, the news at sea that reached Bagland was severely outdated. It wasn't of much use to people who needed it, so subscription numbers were low, and the business was floundering. Later, with a suggestion from a new chief editor, the newspaper's style changed. It had more rumors out at sea, as well as all sorts of strange matters revolving pirates and adventurers. It appeared more like stories rather than actual news reports. To people's surprise, this change in style was welcomed. As it involved ghosts, spectres, sea monsters, and treasures, it became the semi-literate people's prime choice to flaunt their knowledge to the illiterate at the various bars. After all, although the stories seemed fake, they were sufficiently interesting. Ian casually flipped through the newspapers without finding any content of interest. He only had a deep impression on one of the reports in News at Sea. According to our correspondent, on the night of the 25th of March, the King of Immortality fleet attacked a ship heading from East Bulain to Fisac and plundered all its goods and money. And living up to his title, Stolfriki Shades finished a bloody massacre. These pirates are really preposterous. Ian shook his head and lowered the newspapers. He returned to the card room and continued his game. Outside the bar, Emlyn boarded a carriage and leaned onto the carriage wall as he watched the street lamps move past him. He pinched his nose again and silently muttered, a wraith. This arms dealer sure is resourceful, not bad. Emlyn closed his eyes as he felt more hopeful about his entrusted mission. The sunlight shone in from outside, dyeing the captain's cabin golden. Edwina sat on a chair with a book in hand as she looked opposite her. So, you also believe that the Solomon, Transoist, and Tudor empires all coexisted? This is a necessary condition for the War of the Four Emperors, Klein simply replied. He held a book titled Book of the Three Worlds. It originated from a life school of thought member before it landed in Vice Admiral Iceberg's hands. It described the material world, the spirit world, and the world beyond rationality. It included some information on charms, with rather profound parts. Klein was seriously reading information on this in a bid to better use the Sea God Scepter and the Worm of Time. Klein had actually discovered that the books collected by Vice Admiral Iceberg were various ancient texts that were rather unsystematic. This was quite different from the characteristics of the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom which backed her. Therefore, he guessed that the internal, orthodox, systematic mysticism knowledge of the Church was not public. Edwina was just about to ask again when she suddenly realized the Golden Dream's cruising speed gradually drop. She looked out the window and after a few looks, said crisply, We've arrived in Bayan. We've reached Bayan. Klein stood up upon hearing that and looked out. He saw the familiar Resistance's private harbour. He didn't show his surprise as he commented calmly, faster than I expected. It was 3 hours faster than he had expected. It's faster than I expected as well. Edwina looked away and agreed with Gem and Sparrow. However, these are all unimportant details. Klein lowered his head, pretending as though he was browsing through the rest of the Book of the Three Worlds. He then handed it to Vice Admiral Iceberg. That marks the end of this discussion. Edwina looked at the book in silence. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. She reached for the Book of the Three Worlds and placed it on the table in passing. Following that, she got up and bowed. I look forward to future discussions with you. Your expertise in ancient history is admirable. If Klein had been acting as himself, he would have said a few words of humility while praising Vice Admiral Iceberg for her breadth of knowledge. Unfortunately, he was the crazy adventurer, Gem and Sparrow. All he did was nod and say, We are collaborators. It meant that there would be opportunities in the future. He didn't speak further as he left the captain's cabin and returned to his room. He packed his suitcase with a relaxed mind, waited for the Golden Dream to dock, and then headed straight for the deck. At that moment, there were many crew members gathered on the deck. It included Gormabel Walls, Singer Orpheus, and Flowery Bowtie Johnson, most of the crew who were upper echelon members of the pirate crew with their heads worth a handsome bounty. They gave sincere smiles as they happily kept waving at Klein. Among them, Barrel and Ironskin were filled with excitement as they belted out a song for their departing guest. When did I have such a good relationship with them? Klein lampooned as he walked past the pirates until he arrived at the gangway. Anderson Hood was there with his hair combed, his clothes neat and tidy. He said with a laugh, They probably mean to say goodbye, or should I say, let's hope we don't meet again. Gemmen, do you know how dangerous a situation you were in? You nearly became the public enemy of every crew member. They were so eager to steer the Golden Dream to Bayan in 5 minutes. Klein was just about to answer when he saw Danitz jog over with a black cloak draped over him. This fellow has really resolved himself to do better, and he plans to leave the Golden Dream to go at it alone. This is a little incompatible with my plans. Only by being around Vice Admiral Iceberg and the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom would his value as a believer of the Fool be accentuated. However, it doesn't matter. If Danitz can grow stronger, it will be even more meaningful. Klein habitually measured the pros and cons before ignoring his other thoughts. He looked at Danitz in silence and waited for him to speak. Danitz opened his mouth with a serious expression, but nothing came out of it. All he did was give a hollow chuckle and say to Anderson, Do you have the potion formula for Conspira? Yes, Anderson said with a chuckle. But I have no plans on selling it to you. Danitz's expression darkened as Anderson continued, unfazed. What's the point of obtaining the Conspira potion formula now? Any attempts to advance now will only result in failure. Pal, it's best you redo your acting as a hunter, followed by a provoker, and then a pyromaniac. Hey, it's best that you get an artisan to make that giant's heart into a defensive mystical item. Otherwise, I'm afraid you will be killed by others when the time comes. After you're sure about your chances, get the Conspira potion formula from your captain. She has it. However, I believe that will be the end for you. Hey, Conspira has very high requirements. Denitz's face twitched as he was being mocked, but he remembered every word Anderson told him. This was because the man before him had the title of strongest hunter, who had rich experience on this pathway. Furthermore, he had a vague idea that the key was acting. He suspected that the captain's guidance from before was directed at this, just as it was rather vague. There will come a day when I'll let you know what a true conspirator is, Denitz stubbornly retorted before looking at Gem and Sparrow. He cleared his throat as he said without daring to look into his eyes, I've already made a request with Captain. In the future, I'll be in contact with the Resistance, and I'll often be in Bayan. It means you don't wish to leave the Golden Dream, but you will find opportunities to hone yourself. Hey, why does it feel like you're reporting to your boss? Klein chuckled inwardly as he gave a terse answer. Denitz was instantly relieved as he felt a lot better. If it wasn't because his companions were watching behind him, he would have diligently helped Gem and Sparrow carry his suitcase and send him all the way to the dock. After watching Gemmen and Anderson leave, he cautiously decided to pray to the Fool every day starting tonight. He wanted to show his devotion to prevent any accidents from happening to him. Inside the Resistance's private harbor, Anderson watched as Gem and Sparrow circled into another newly built road before walking out of the woods via the shortest distance. You seem familiar with this place. This road wasn't here the last time I was here, Anderson said, partially bored and poignant. Of course, there are so many people praying to me every day telling me what they've done, and I occasionally give them a response. Such as directing them to mend this road, Klein thought smugly but replied with a stoic expression, where does your friend stay? In a manor in the Bayam city outskirts, Anderson sped up his pace as he led the way. An hour later, he brought Klein to a manor. There was an eclectic smell from various spices, mixed with an indescribable sight's exoticism. After informing the gatekeeper of their intentions, the two didn't wait long before they saw a man of medium-sized build of less than 1.75 meters walk over. By his side were his butler and valet. The man's skin was somewhat sallow, with quite a tan. His contours were gentle, but his eye sockets were much more recessed than most Loanese. To Klein, he could basically determine the man's background. He was a Highlander from the Finnepotter Kingdom. The man was already a little plump, with a rotund, amiable face. He immediately laughed when he saw the strongest hunter. Anderson, you aren't dead yet? I'm waiting to attend your funeral, Anderson replied without standing on ceremony. He then turned sideways to Klein. Yukfa Connor Chris, the doctor of my former team. He didn't introduce Gem and Sparrow to Yukfa and said with a grin, I've brought you business. Yukfa instantly understood Anderson and didn't ask in front of his butler and valet. He led the duo towards the main building in the manor. Along the way, Klein saw buildings like windmills, bakery, brewery, and militia training grounds. The entire manor appeared like a miniaturized kingdom. Apart from the lack of a blacksmith, it was completely self-sufficient. Most Klein products were cheaper buying them from the city than personally making them. This is the pastoral lifestyle Klein sighed silently as he followed Yukfa into the house and to his study. Yukfa didn't call the mistress of the house over, nor did he carry his child to meet Anderson and Klein. Clearly, he didn't wish for them to have any contact with the mysterious world. Hence, after he closed the door, he went straight to the point. What's the business? Didn't you wish to sell that revolver? He has intentions on buying it. Anderson pointed at Klein. Gem and Sparrow. Gem and Sparrow, the powerful adventurer who easily hunted Ormtongue Merthyr, Yukfa said in surprise, but he didn't show any fear. Although he had distanced himself from the adventuring lifestyle, he knew that he couldn't be careless. Therefore, while in Bayam, he would proactively keep himself informed to prevent trouble from happening. Anderson scoffed when he heard that. That's old news. This gentleman's achievements include successfully hunting slaughter clichés while living to this day. Clichés, the second mate of the King of Immortality. Yukfa's expression changed. He couldn't hide his horror as he secretly turned wary. That's right, Anderson said with a self-deprecating smile. In the pirate's playground, he's the one who's recognized as the strongest hunter. Yukfa gulped as he looked at Klein. He couldn't help but smile and say, I believe you have the ability to buy Death Knell. Death Knell? Klein asked with piqued interest, but he didn't show it. That's the name of the revolver. It has accompanied me for a decade. Sigh, if it's not because it overlaps in functionality with one of my other mystical items, and isn't of much use for me at present, I wouldn't be willing to sell it, Yukfa replied with a sigh. At that moment, Anderson TSK'd with laughter. That wasn't what you said before. You said you preferred farming tools. A planter Klein made the corresponding judgment based on Anderson's words and Yukfa's expression. Meanwhile, the corresponding potion names flashed through his mind, Sequence 9 Planter, Sequence 8 Doctor with the ancient name Healing Pastor, and Sequence 7 Harvest Priest. It's no wonder Anderson introduced him as his former team's Dr. Klein thought for a moment and said, do you know Frank Lee? Ha ha, no, although I'm from Finnepotter, my formula and ingredients were obtained by myself, one at a time. I had nothing to do with the Church of Mother Earth. Therefore, I wouldn't dare to return to Finnepotter. However, I've heard of Frank Lee. He's someone who gives the Church quite a headache, Yukfa replied frankly. He's only a Sequence 6 biologist, but he's given such importance by the Church. I really do wish to meet him if there's a chance. No, you won't. You will regret having that thought. Klein could tell from Yukfa's answer that he believed in Mother Earth and was likely a powerful Sequence 5 beyonder. By his side, Anderson's face twitched when he heard Yukfa. He said with lingering fear, that guy does give one a headache. In a certain sense, you can call him a devil. His powers and thoughts have exceeded the level of the Sequence 6 all right, let's not talk about him. Whenever his name pops up, I still remember the milk that was jettisoned. Yukfa looked at the duo in puzzlement as he restrained his looks of curiosity. He walked to the table side, opened a drawer, and pulled out an iron black revolver that looked a little longer than an ordinary revolver. This is Death Knell, Yukfa introduced it solemnly. Death Knell, striking the enemy's Death Knell with every shot. I like this name. Klein controlled his facial expressions as he went forward without any anticipation or excitement on his face. He reached out to receive the iron black revolver with a slightly long barrel. He was originally very worried that Yukfa would raise the price if he showed any strong desires for it. This was common in any transaction, but on second thought, with Gem and Sparrow's reputation, and with Anderson, the strongest hunter of the Fog Sea, as a witness, it was unlikely that Yukfa Connor Chris would offend him despite possibly being a Sequence 5 beyonder. After all, he had quite the adventuring circles and had hoped to lead a quiet and settled life. He definitely had reservations that the crazy adventurer might sneak into the manor in the middle of the night despite not flaring up in front of him. Therefore, his attempts to maintain his calm and composed attitude became one of simply maintaining his persona. Realizing that Gem and Sparrow was seriously inspecting and studying Death Knell, Yukfa gave a detailed introduction. Its powers are rather uniform, to reap the lives of others. There are 3 methods. First is weakness attack. There's no need to meet any conditions. Just directly inject your spirituality and pull the trigger. It will allow you to discover the target's weaknesses from a mysticism angle. In other words, it will be the aspects where defenses are weaker, and it will provide you with the corresponding accuracy, thus resulting in extraordinarily terrifying damage. The second is lethal attack. You have to cock the hammer before shooting. Its distinguishing feature is that wherever you hit a target, it will be equivalent to an attack on their weak spot. And if you really do strike the true weak spot, it will be capable of dealing a lethal blow to an enemy without overly strong defenses. To targets who are good at defending, 3 shots would be able to resolve the matter. This includes Guardian. Of course, that is under the premise that the 3 lethal blows aren't spread too far apart. It's best not to exceed 5 seconds. The third is slaughtering, on the foundation of a weakness attack, providing more than twice the spirituality on top of that will imbue ordinary bullets with great shot effects. Simultaneously, when aimed at a group of enemies, it will result in area of effect damage. To increase the damage, it will need to meet the conditions for lethal attack, as well as provide more than thrice the spirituality. This strain will be quite a burden on the user. It can also be combined with bullets with different characteristics, allowing you to target different kinds of enemies. This sounds like it corresponds to a Sequence 5 Reaper of the Hunter pathway. Klein glanced at Anderson and asked, seemingly in thought, if the target's physical condition reaches that of a Sequence 4 dragon, how many strikes of lethal attack will kill it? Yukfa was taken aback as he shook his head in a daze. I've never met a dragon before. Much less a dragon whose physical condition has reached that of a demigod. Does Gem and Sparrow plan on using this gun to slay dragons? And a demigod dragon at that? Isn't that way too crazy? Yukfa suddenly felt that the adventurers these days were completely different from the ones he met back when he was active. He didn't even consider the possibility of death. Anderson coughed before clearing his throat. That will depend on your luck. For real, trust me, luck is extremely important. If you encounter a dragon that has been beaten to a state close to death, then 1 shot would be sufficient. Otherwise, I suggest you to run. Yes, it's more important to stay alive. Of course, if the demigod dragon doesn't defend and stays there for you hit it, 5 shots of lethal attack should be enough to kill it. Yukfa looked at Anderson before looking at Gem and Sparrow. He decided not to pursue the topic as he changed topics. Anderson has told you about the negative effects of Death Knell, right? You will receive a weakness that originally didn't exist, or it will enhance an already existing weakness, making it become more extreme. This effect will be maintained for 6 hours. There was once a time when I became extremely afraid of cats. There was one when I had just hunted a famous pirate, but I ended up going limp in the legs in front of a newborn kitten. I knelt before it, wailing and crying for it to spare me. If you carry it around, the problems aren't great. It will only make you easily thirsty. Just drinking more water and heading to the washroom more often would solve the problem. Why does it feel like the negative effects of an additional weakness will bring me more trouble? However, it is something acceptable. Klein deliberated and said, name your price. 9,000 pounds. Anderson should have mentioned it. That's my bottom line. Yukfa looked at Death Knell and Gem and Sparrow's hands and said, this is already cheap enough. If it wasn't because I was worried that getting to know more Beyonders would affect my present life, I would have actively promoted it. I'm sure I can sell it for 12,000 pounds. Indeed, a mystical item at this level can be sold for sky-high prices if the negative effects aren't too serious when meeting a suitable buyer. Normally speaking, 10,000 to 12,000 pounds is a reasonable price. Although Klein had the intention of bargaining, the price was already low enough that he felt embarrassed to try and take advantage of him. With a terse acknowledgement, he said, I'll give it a run. I'll complete the deal if there aren't any problems. Of course, he didn't really try the gun, as it would give him a weakness for nothing. His method for inspection was to use his spirituality to probe the gun, along with testing for the credibility of Yukfa's words via divination. He did it rather openly, without minding Yukfa's and Anderson's gazes. I'll make confirmation later about the grey fog. However, Yukfa likely doesn't dare to lie to me. He's definitely afraid of a crazy adventurer seeking revenge on him. After all, he has already obtained a settled and quiet life. He has a wife and children. Klein placed Death Knell on the table, lifted his suitcase, and took out 9,000 pounds from it. The money had been removed from above the grey fog to air it ahead of time. After Yukfa received the money, he did a quick count and confirmed the authenticity of the money. As expected of a recently famous adventurer. Few people can produce 9,000 pounds in cash at once. Even a tycoon doesn't have that much liquidity, he said poignantly as he put away the stacks of cash. I even spent 5,000 pounds to buy a key not long ago. Klein felt his heart suddenly turn empty as he saw the 9,000 pounds enter Yukfa's drawer. I've been out at sea for so long, saving up so much money, but in just moments, it's all gone now. I'm left with 2,683 pounds and 6 gold coins. I can't even afford a relatively decent manner. Klein sighed as he took out the ordinary revolver from his underarm holster, removed the bullets inside, and stuffed them into Death Knell. After Anderson watched the entire transaction, he said with a TSK, Yukfa, you've changed. In the past, you would have checked the authenticity of each note. If you find it troublesome, I can help you. It's totally fine, but I'm worried that Geman will shoot you. Yukfa clearly knew the strongest hunter's talent at provocation. He could imagine the scene of Anderson posing in a way that was begging to be beaten, counting each and every note while verifying them against the light in slow motion. Well said. Klein silently praised him. He then stuffed the iron black, long-barreled revolver into his underarm holster. The original revolver was thrown inside the suitcase. Thanks to you, I no longer have to fret over this matter, Yukfa said with a smile as he pointed at the door. I'll get my valet to send you out. Anderson opened his mouth as he chuckled. Yukfa, aren't you going to keep us here for dinner? When you're married with kids, I'll treat you to the best food at the best restaurant, Yukfa said with a smile, completely unfazed by his accusation. Out of the man, Anderson looked up with squinted eyes. At the sight of the setting sun, he chuckled. Back when I knew Yukfa, he was a doctor who was good at planting all kinds of strange plants on a ship to improve everyone's lives. I thought he would die early on during our adventures, but to my surprise, he was always lucky. He even became a druid later. Why are your poignant words also so deserving of a beating? Klein deliberately said, he does have good luck. As your companion, luck is needed to survive. Anderson turned his head in surprise as he scrutinized Gem and Sparrow. You know how to mock others, or have you been infected by me? He wasn't too affected by it as he straightened his clothes, took off his hat, and said with a smile, all right, you've gotten the mystical item you need. If there's nothing else, it's time I embark on my own journey. Don't forget that Demigod's mission. Klein succeeded in using a single sentence to crumple Anderson's expression. I already have an urge that compels me to finish that matter as soon as possible. All right, there's no need for goodbyes. Perhaps we might really meet again one day. Anderson gave a self-deprecating laugh, waved the hat in his hand, and turned to head towards another path that left to Bayan. As he watched the strongest hunter depart, Klein slowly heaved a sigh. Holding his suitcase, he followed the path he took to get here and headed for Bayam under the red evening sky and the shelter of unique palm trees. Inside Bayam City. After finding an ordinary inn to stay in, Klein began considering his subsequent plans. I'm finally free. I can attempt to act as a marionettist. I have to figure out the corresponding principles. That's the most pressing issue for now. Yes, marionettist. The focus should be on the marionette. I haven't actually created a marionette and controlled it in battle. I should start from there. This matter can be completed before returning to Bagland. Not only do Beyonders have to stay hidden there, making it difficult to encounter one, but no matter what one does, it's easy to get on the bad side of the church or some important figure. I need to be careful. It's not a good place to select and create marionettes. The sea is better. I'll go make my rounds at the bar later. I'll find a pirate who deserves death to give it a try. With this in mind, Klein immediately got up and left his room. As though he was bringing his certificate of deposit to a bank to withdraw the money, he headed for the nearby seaweed bar. Famous pirates often showed up there. Soon, he arrived at the bar's entrance. After straightening his clothes, he pushed open the heavy wooden door. Gazes subconsciously swept past his face before they moved away as though it wasn't anything extraordinary. Following that, someone shouted with a suppressed voice, "Gemman Sparrow." In a blink of an eye, several figures in the bar ran for the back door. Before Klein could figure out what was happening, the bar was left relatively desolate and empty. As Klein looked at the bar, which was so silent that he could hear breathing, he was taken aback. Only then did he step in and walk straight to the bar counter as though nothing had happened. I should change my appearance the next time I come, he thought in frustration, just short of facile palming. Yukfa's lack of awareness that Gemman Sparrow had successfully hunted slaughter cliches had made Klein believe that the latest news hadn't reached the city of generosity. And he boldly came to the seaweed bar. To his surprise, the problem lay in Yukfa, who had kept a distance from the adventurer circles. He was a little behind on the news, and the crazy adventurer's infamy had already spread amongst the pirates around the Rorsted archipelago. Sighing silently, Klein sat in front of the bar counter and rapped the wooden counter. 1 glass of Southville beer. 6 pence. The bartender gulped his saliva with great difficulty. Klein took out a few copper pence and placed it in front of him. Without a change in expression, he asked, "Any developments recently?" The bartender took the money and carefully delivered the beer to Gemman Sparrow. Then, he forced a smile and said, "Admiral Emirius Rievelt has been transferred back to Bagland. Admiral Robert Davis has replaced him, becoming the highest-ranking naval commander of the surrounding waters for the kingdom. The archipelago's situation is a little tense, and many pirate crews have sent people to gather intelligence. Admiral Emirius was ultimately implicated by his brother and lost his post, however, as long as he wasn't directly involved. It can't get worse for him when considering his status as a demigod. At the very least, he can maintain the treatment he receives as an admiral. Nothing will happen to his family either. Once the matter blows over, he might still have a chance of being a high-ranking member of the Navy." Klein gulped down the beer and asked in passing, "Which family is Robert Davis from?" "No, he's not a noble. He's one of the rare officers who slowly rose up the ranks to admiral. In the Berserk Sea, Sonia Island, and East Belaine, he has rendered plenty of meritorious services." The bartender recalled the commendations the papers recently had for Admiral Robert Davis. After a pause, he said, "However, I heard that he has received the sponsorship of many nobles." "Yes, with the Imperial Navy, admirals who are from the royal family or aristocrats, or have close ties with them take up at least 80%. The remaining 20% are mainly rear admirals and vice admirals." Klein had long learned of the situation from the documents he received from Emirius Rievelt. Compared to this, the army was a lot better. Gemman Sparrow didn't continue asking as he seemed to focus on his drinking. The bartender then added, "In the past 2 to 3 months, the resistance has been very active. They've been constantly attempting to destroy railways or set up blockades on public roads. They've given the Governor-General's office quite a headache, forcing it to dispatch large numbers of soldiers to maintain a smooth flow of traffic. However, the resistance army seldom clashes with them head-on. I'm aware of that. It's all going according to my plans in a place where the natives and mixed blood take up 80%. It's not difficult for the resistance to gather accurate intelligence. Coupled with external sponsors, it wouldn't be hard for them to live on for short periods of time. The reason why they were in a dire situation in the past was all because Corvetchu was an irrational sea serpent. It often got them to attack key nodes in a city, fighting head-on with the Loan Kingdom's navy and army." Klein mumbled to himself in delight as he drank another mouthful of beer. He had also warned the resistance to not be overly active. If they forced the Governor-General's office into a corner, the Loan Kingdom might send Sequence 5 Beyonders or even demigods who were good at pursuit and tracking. With the resistance's strength, there was no way they could put up a fight. In the name of Sea God, Klein's instructions were to maintain while slightly improving their present situation and await for the global situation to change. This wasn't too far off, according to the various matters Miss Justice had feedback on, and with the Hanged Man giving insight that affirmed this. It was certain that once the Loan Kingdom was done with its internal reforms and making the original and newly added ironclad warship become its main force in combat, a war against the southern continent's colonies was inevitable. He silently drank his beer until the bartender was done. He then wore his hat, got up, and left the bar, heading straight for his inn. Along the way, he saw bronze-skinned children with curly hair and natives with brown jackets and pantaloons. These people either made way in horror without even looking up, or they were hunched in a corner, looking at Klein with a complicated look in their eyes. Klein helplessly curved the ends of his lips as he silently returned to his room. He didn't immediately change his appearance and head to the various bars to seek out pirates. This was because he was certain that they would hide the entire night and not appear again. Just as Klein was planning to enter Grossel's travels to explore it, there was a knock on his door. Without needing to ask, all he did was grip the knob when the visitor's appearance naturally surfaced in his mind. It was a middle-aged man dressed in a dark red coat and white slacks. He wore a ship-shaped hat. The corners of his eyes and mouth, as well as his forehead, had clear wrinkles. He was none other than the captain of the White Agate, military personnel, Just Island. Impressive. News of me appearing in Bayam just spread, and he managed to find where I'm staying. Of course, it's because I didn't attempt to hide myself. I directly used my identification documents to check, and Klein turned the knob and pulled open the door. He politely greeted him. "Good evening." "Good evening. I'm very glad to see you back in Bayam." Elend took off his hat and entered the room without any reservations. "Is there something?" Klein pulled a chair over and sat down. Elend sat opposite him and chuckled. "Isn't visiting a friend the most important matter? You're such a smooth talker. Too bad Anderson is gone, or he can learn from you." Klein felt triggered for some reason. He maintained his usual state and looked into Elend's eyes. "All right, you've made your visit." Elend seemed to have expected such a response. He smiled and said, "Do you still remember Donna?" "Of course, she and her brother are adorable. I wonder if they've recovered from the fright I gave them the last time and have given up any curiosity towards the mysterious world." Klein calmly replied, "I don't have amnesia. Forgetting unimportant matters aids our mental health. Hey, this isn't said by Emperor Lascelles. Elend simply explained, didn't you tell Donner's father that he should post an advertisement in the Sonia Morning Post for 3 days in a row, asking to buy the mayor's special cured meat if he needs your help? He did so recently, but unfortunately, you weren't in Bayam or the nearby seas. What happened after that? Klein's instincts told him that Donner and her family weren't in serious trouble based on Elend's relaxed attitude. Elend chuckled and said, I heard your conversation back then, and after discovering the advertisement, I visited them using the address. As you know, Donner is a lovely lady. She reminds me of my daughter. The matter isn't too complicated. Urdi, who's Donner's father, had a bunch of valuable goods plundered by the crazy captain. This plunged him into a terrible economic situation. Although it isn't as bad as going bankrupt, life for him has definitely turned for the worse. That's why he wishes to commission you to get the goods back. I knew you weren't in Bayam back then, so I had to go through my own channels to help Urdi recoup the goods at a reasonable price. Crazy Captain. Klein first found the title familiar before recalling where he had heard it before. According to red-haired Helen, Vice Admiral Ailman Tracy's delivery of slaves for the Demones sect was passed off to Crazy Captain Connors Viter. The latter appeared to have close connections with many of the slave dealers and merchants in the Loan Kingdom. And this was tied to the truth behind the human disappearances in the colonies, as well as the underlying reason of the great smog of Backland. I've always been trying to investigate this matter. Back when I attacked Tracy, that was half the reason, but unfortunately, I didn't succeed. Later, I was busy acting for the digesting of the potion and my search for mermaids, so I temporarily abandoned my investigations. Klein's thoughts raced as he asked without a perturbed look, where's Crazy Captain now? Urdi has already gotten back his goods, Elend hissed, emphasizing that the matter had been settled. Klein looked at him and repeated, where's Connors Viter now? Elend shook his head in exasperation. I've no idea, but his subordinates are still in Bayam trying to gather intelligence. As you know, Admiral Amirius has returned to Backland, and he's been replaced by Admiral Davis. Many changes are in place, so the pirates need to have a new handle of the latest situation. Therefore, I guess that Connors's ship is docked in the shadows of one of the nearby islands, but that's a guess with no way to confirm. After listening in silence with his hands clasped, Klein said, thank you. Elend exhaled and looked out the window as his expression rapidly turned solemn. I came here today to tell you that you're too eye-catching. The higher-ups are beginning to pay attention to you. A powerhouse that can easily kill clichés wouldn't be ignored. It's best you stop using this identity for checking in, otherwise, you might face some difficult problems. Klein nodded seriously and said, all right. He was very grateful for Captain Elend's warning, but he didn't show it on his face. After Elend left, Klein immediately changed his appearance, switched tins, and confirmed that he wasn't tracked by the military. After doing all of that, he began considering the search for Crazy Captain Connors Viter. To others, this was an extremely difficult task, but Klein had a trick up his sleeve. It was to use the Sea God Scepter and communicate with nearby sea creatures. As long as Connors Viter was in the Roasted Archipelago's waters, there was no way he could hide from Klein. Of course, it was necessary that he had enough time to perform the search. Above the grey fog, Klein extended his hand and summoned the Sea God Scepter from the junk pile. He began browsing through the countless points of light swirling about the sealed artifact. Every point of light corresponded to a believer's prayer. The glow swirled with ethereal holiness. Soon, Klein did a preliminary screening as he focused on the waters instead of the archipelago. After he had isolated the Sea God Scepter above the grey fog, he was unable to directly use the divine artifact to sense the surrounding waters and do anything effective. He had to rely on the scenes of his believer's prayers as a foundation before reaching out 5 nautical miles to influence the corresponding undersea creatures. Klein emanated his spirituality and touched one of the specks of light. He saw a native performing his daily prayers in the evening on a fishing boat before docking. As Klein's thoughts changed, the angle of the scene quickly drew higher as more dark clouds and undulating waves appeared in the scene. There are signs of a storm brewing hours ahead. That's right. I did find the atmosphere oppressing when I was out. That's why Elend said that Crazy Captain Connors's ship is likely to be hiding in the shadows of some island. It was to avoid a storm. Klein tapped the edge of the mottled table as he muttered silently. Having deduced this, it made his search much easier. This was because he didn't need to search the extensive waters. All he needed to do was focus on the different islands around those waters. With a change in thought, a blue gem at the tip of the Sea God Scepter in Klein's hand lit up. On the waters which no longer had the fishing boat, the crimson moonlight shone down on the deep blue waves that were slowly rising. Suddenly, splashes silently surged upwards as an exaggerated eye looking up into the sky surfaced. Beneath the eye was a massive silhouette. At the same time, all kinds of fish began surfacing nearby. They took in the indistinct halo that came scattering down, and they circled around before swimming down and headed in different directions. 10 seconds later, the waters in a 5 nautical mile radius returned to its previous state. The deep blue waves rose up to a high height again, awaiting the final eruption. Phew, this is a little draining. Klein raised his left hand to rub his temple. He wasn't only simply commandeering the sea creatures, he had also bestowed them with remnant beyond their spirituality to a certain degree. It allowed them to transmit the scenes they saw by praying after they discovered any docked ships around the island. This wasn't too difficult or complicated for the Sea God Scepter, but it was burdensome and draining for the controller, Klein. Then, Klein selected a few praying believers situated on different islands around the archipelago. He then used the same method to command the sea creatures of the region. After doing all of this, he didn't bother throwing the Sea God Scepter into the junk pile before returning to the real world. He took off his coat and collapsed into bed. Having expended his spirituality to the limit, he believed that he would fall asleep immediately. Yet, his head began aching, preventing him from opening his eyes or falling asleep. Klein could clearly feel that his skin seemed overly sensitive. Lumps grew over his skin, and hidden beneath them were countless meat tendrils. Indeed, as Mr. Hangman said, if you drain your spirituality to 0 for 2 consecutive days, you'll definitely start hearing things and show signs of losing control. My body became a little abnormal just from reaching my limits once despite not even maintaining it for too long. Of course, it's because I've only recently advanced, and I haven't digested much. Furthermore, there's the excess from the potions from the prior sequences. Klein regained his train of thought as he attempted to cogitate the stacked spherical lights so as to calm the fatigue of his body and mind. Having gradually recovered, he finally fell asleep. By the time he woke up, it was in the middle of the night. At that moment, the winds were howling outside. The rain was pouring as the storm had finally unleashed its might after a prolonged period of brewing. And this wasn't a rare situation in Bayam. Apart from that, the night was relatively serene. Klein went to the washroom to clear his bowels. Washing his hands and taking 4 steps counterclockwise, he once again appeared above the grey fog. He picked up the Sea God Scepter on the end of the long bronze table and began browsing through the scenes from the sea creatures. The scenes were that of ships, all located at different ports, harbours, or the shadows of different islands. Although Klein hadn't seen crazy Captain Connors Victor, he had previously learned of his traits and the various emblems of his pirate crew. Therefore, he wasn't afraid of failing to identify him. Scenes flashed past as he patiently scrutinized the details of the ships. About 10 minutes later, a look of unconcealed joy appeared in his eyes. He zoomed in on the scene as he pulled the orientation of the scene closer. He had found a suspected ship. The ship was docked at the back of Simim Island, an island furthest from the Rorsted archipelago. Behind it was a towering cliff with churning waves below it. Its sails and flag had been reefed up, but there was a white skull emblem with an eye patch on the two sides of the ship. This was none other than the emblem of the crazy captain's pirate crew. Klein removed the spirit pendulum from his left wrist and made a confirmation with divination. The answer made him rejoice, as it was indeed Connors Victor's ship. And Crazy Captain only had one ship. It's no wonder that despite most adventurers at sea knowing that Crazy Captain is in contact with the kingdom's human traffickers and slave merchants, the Church of Storms' investigations of the colony disappearances didn't point to him. He only has a bounty of £3,300. The pirate crew only has one ship, so it just looks like it's a small business. It's impossible for him to do large-scale human trafficking. What should I do next? Klein first sighed silently before considering his angle of investigation. His first reaction was to summon a massive undersea creature, hitch a ride on something akin to a whale, and head straight for Simim Island while the storm continued. Then, he could infiltrate and use his powers as a marionettist to control Crazy Captain Connors Victor without causing too much of a stir. But on careful thought, he felt that it was a rash decision. It wasn't a problem dealing with other pirates who weren't at the pirate admiral level, but since Crazy Captain Connors Victor was involved with a terrifying matter like the Great Smog of Backland, he had to consider that Connors' normal actions were just a disguise. In consideration of how he might have another identity, with the ship concealing some secrets, there was a high chance that there was a trap that could deal with pirate admirals. Klein might not walk out alive despite being armed to the teeth if he made such a rash infiltration attempt. Should I summon myself and head over with the Sea God Scepter as a spirit body? This can avoid some accidents, as I can immediately end the summoning if anything goes wrong. However, the Sea God Scepter is essentially the beyond characteristic of a high-sequence beyonder from the storm pathway. As long as it appears in the real world, it might attract Sea King Galtman. This will prevent the situation from developing as I expect it till Klein looked at the storm in the scene as he came up with a preliminary plan. Before that, he conjured a pen and paper and wrote the divination statement. Dealing with Connors Victor is very dangerous. Picking up the silver chain of the spirit pendulum, Klein reined in his thoughts and focused on the divination. Soon, he opened his eyes to see the topaz pendant turning clockwise at a high frequency and large amplitudes. This meant that dealing with Connors Victor was very dangerous. It's as I expected. Thankfully, I didn't rashly rush over. Klein picked up the Sea God Scepter and decided on executing the plan he had just thought of. It was to use the prayer scene and strike Connors Victor's ship with the Sea God Scepter from afar by using the cover of the storm. He would rouse the nest and force out its secret. After grasping the relevant situation, he would end the attacks before Sea King Galtman sensed the abnormality or arrived at the scene. Klein wouldn't feel disappointed if Connors Victor unfortunately landed in the hands of the Sea King. This was because he would have to think of the means to pass the information to the three churches after he figured out the truth of the Great Smog of Backland. If Crazy Captain successfully escaped, Klein would have pried into his secrets by rousing the nest. He could then subsequently formulate a plan of attack. Klein slowly exhaled as he watched the ship bob about with the dark crashing waves before raising the Sea God Scepter high in the air. At the tip of the scepter, the blue gems that circled around it had begun to emit a bright light.